Welcome to Witnessing Christ. Witnessing Christ is a truth and love ministry podcast designed to help biblical Christians witness to their Mormon friends, family, and missionaries. For more Bible-based resources, check out tilm.org. We have all kinds of resources to support you, including classes, witnessing scenarios, books, and so much more. Visit tilm.org today.
Previously on Jesus is Enough.
And we're not supposed to talk about politics and religion. And guess what? Pilots often love to talk about politics and religion. And you learn to just let it come up organically. Like, I've never tried to proselytize aggressively. It's just you talk about this stuff and you ask each other questions and you just get each other thinking. And my goal was, especially as a Mormon, when I flew with Christians, they'd be like, well, Mormons aren't Christians and Mormons worship the devil. And I'd be like, okay, well, how much do you know about Mormonism? So I would listen and I would try to see if I could throw them off their game of condemning me to hell. And that would be my goal, is just to kind of throw them off balance and give them pause to think. I never was aggressive, like, here, read the Book of Mormon and you want to be baptized. It was more just, I wanted to use Socratic method, ask them questions, and lead them into a corner to where they had to concede that they did not know what they were talking about. And that I love that. Absolutely, that lit my fire, man. My name's Erik. I am an ethnic Mormon. I identify as a disciple of Jesus Christ. This is my story of how I came to faith through the Bible in Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Jesus is Enough, a series where we dive deep into the transformational faith stories of ex-Mormon Christians. These are true stories of real souls whom God has rescued out of the darkness by revealing to them the biblical gospel message through His Word, the message that Jesus is enough. This week on the show, we have part 4 of Erik's story. With life going according to plan, Erik is blindsided by a crisis at home. Feeling lost and angry as he grapples with reality, he seeks solace in a support group and finds some unexpected allies who point him to the true meaning of grace. Now here's part 4 of Erik's story of discovering that Jesus is enough. Thanks for listening.
Paid in full, all sufficient, there and now
These cockpit conversations became a regular occurrence for Erik with whomever he flew with, whether they were atheists, Christians, or fellow Latter-day Saints. Eventually, some of his Mormon colleagues were going through faith crisis, including those affected by an animated television series.
And then came the time of South Park and the episode of The Rock and the Hat.
And so Joseph Smith put his head into a hat and read to me what the golden plate said. I wrote it all down and we're going to publish it into a book.
Martin, how do you know he isn't just making stuff up and pretending he's translating off golden plates?
Lucy Harris, smart, 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 smart.
This episode of South Park, written by former Mormons, mocks Mormons for believing that Joseph Smith faithfully translated the Book of Mormon with a hat and a rock, and calls those who doubt it smart, 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 and those who believe it dumb, dumb, dumb.
He is so mad that he will never let me translate from the plate of Lehi again. He said we must now translate from the plate of Nephi. So it will be the same basic story, but written a little differently.
Wow! If God got angry with you, then you must be telling the truth.
Dum, 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 dum.
I watched it and I wanted to figure out what that was about. And I was like, why do they have this weird perception of the translation process of the Book of Mormon? Like, that's not how it went down.
Wanting to ensure he could speak accurately and articulately about what actually happened, Erik dedicated himself to searching and studying.
up and I'm like, okay, I want to have a true understanding of the translation process of the Book of Mormon. I want to know what South Park got right and what they didn't get right. How much of that was hyperbole? How much of that was legit? I didn't go after the church, oh, you lied to us. I was like, I don't want to be caught off guard anymore.
Erik wanted to be prepared, both personally and in his calling as a missionary. So he devoured everything he could find from the leading Mormon apologists of the time.
And of course, I was a big fan of Dan Peterson. And he was really articulate and really condescending, and I kind of liked it. And I was like, oh yeah, I want to defend the faith and just be vicious in how I do it. And I was really involved in those blogs and learning everything I can and gathering this all up. But I got sick of being caught off guard. Like, why do we not know this stuff? Why do the haters, why do the anti-Mormons know more about our actual history than we do? If it's not true, then it should be attacked. It should be scrutinized. And it became apparent that whitewashing had been a problem. It was very propagandized. Everything was faith promotion.
Erik's research into the history of the church and its defense of itself led him to some startling discoveries.
So now I go off on this journey of apologetics, and I love it, but it opens up so many cans of worms. And each worm now becomes an issue that I have to put on my shelf, and it just grows into this monster, right? And so I have a pretty big shelf. I don't know what to do with this. Put it up there. There's got to be legitimate answers, and I want to know what they are. Mormonism has a lot of truth claims. I wanted to get to the bottom of, are these defendable? Can we defend them? And I want to defend them if they are.
Just as his time in Israel had helped him trust the Bible and Jesus, Erik hoped to find the same certainty about the Book of Mormon, its history, and its teachings. He researched and even took a trip.
We took our kids down to Mexico. And I was excited because Mexico, everybody knows that's the land of the Book of Mormon. And they had a Book of Mormon tour. And you could actually go to Chichen Itza and you could ask for the Mormon package. And he would yell and say, Moroni, come over here. There's Mormons that want the Mormon tour. And then I remember he was going around, and anything that could be like contrived, possible Book of Mormon connection, he was going to make it. It was contrived. It was like trying too hard.
But Erik didn't give up after Mexico. He also studied books on the history, geography, and archaeology of the Book of Mormon, but he found them lacking. The evidence was weak, with no substantial historical, geographical, or archaeological proof.
And I'm like, there's got to be a good reason. Because obviously it's true, and if it's true, we should be able to figure it out. And what is the reason that God doesn't want us to find archaeological connections? What is the reason that there is no definitive evidence of Nephites and Lamanites? And I found that alarming. Everything was always such a stretch. And it was fatiguing. It was stacking up. The luxury of those proofs it's just not there.
As Erik's doubts and concerns about the theological and historical aspects of his faith accumulated, his home life also began to implode. His wife made some decisions that led her down a path away from Erik.
She decided she didn't like being a stay-at-home mom, and so she started a business. I supported her. I helped her get it going. It took off. She was making a killing, and she got involved with her business partner, and I was decimated. I did not get married to get divorced. And I remember just being angry. This is not at all what I signed up for. I remember starting to blame God.
After years of drawing closer to God, Erik felt a growing distance fueled by anger, unfulfilled expectations, and seeing all of his hard work crumble.
Now I'm starting to have problems with my relationship with God. Not in whether he's true or not. I really believe God is real. But I'm like angry because I did everything right. I had the eternal celestial marriage in the temple. I served an honorable mission. I obeyed all of the little minutia of rules. And then why is my marriage not happy like I was kind of sold? That everything should be prosperous, everything should be good. And it wasn't. it was real. It was visceral. It was real world. Like, sometimes people don't get along, and sometimes people don't treat each other well, and sometimes relationships hit hard times. And it was devastating to me. Clearly she wasn't happy. I didn't know how to help her, and it was agitating me. And it got to the point where things got so rough, and I just was getting angrier and angrier. And I stopped focusing on this passion of apologetics and church, and I was like, how do I make this gospel of eternal family real and make it work the way it's supposed to?
Erik sought counsel from his bishop. His unhelpful advice caused Erik to have some major doubts.
More scripture reading, more prayer. And that was always the answer. Have you been reading your scriptures? Yes. Maybe you should do it 5 minutes more a day. Maybe you should be more righteous. Maybe you should go to the temple more. And it was always, I had to do more. And I find it ironic that if things don't go the way that they're advertised that they should, it's always your fault. It's always on you. You didn't do enough. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. The whole culture is predicated on happy celestial marriage, right? And now you're broken and wrecked. I just grew angry and resentful. So in desperation to save my marriage, the best way I can describe it is I went to anger camp.
As he had done so many times before, God used Erik's time at anger camp to draw him closer to his heart of grace, ultimately changing the course of Erik's life dramatically.
And the funny thing about anger camp in Utah, they're all Mormon. They're all struggling with their issues. And they're all strangers. And one of them comes up to me and he says, look, I can see that you need a friend. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I do. He says, look, I got to confess something to you. I struggle with same-sex attraction. Please don't call me gay, though, because I'm not gay. Gay insinuates that I'm losing the struggle. And I'm not going to give in to my weakness. So I am SSA. And he said the nicest thing to me. He says, you're an attractive man, but I'm not attracted to you. But I need a friend. I can tell you need a friend. Why don't we just be friends? And it was like the most honest, pure little playground arrangement where we're just like, we're going to be allies. We're going to be buddies. We're going to help each other out. And he introduced me into his friends. And they were all men struggling with SSA. They were all Mormon men struggling with same-sex attraction. And they took me in, and these men now become this wonderful blessing in my life of support and admiration, just a resource of good information. And like, look, maybe you can't salvage your marriage, but we can teach you some things you can do to at least help keep it peaceful. And maybe you can divorce on good terms. And they really did help me have a more amicable divorce.
But these angry men didn't just help Erik navigate his divorce peacefully. One of them even helped him understand the grace of God in a whole new light.
One of the older guys, he had a shirt, said something about Jesus Christ and the grace of Christ and being dependent on the grace of Christ. Now, he's a Mormon. And I asked him about it. Isn't that kind of a Christian thing? He's like, yeah, we go to this support group that's Christian-based. And, realizing that as Mormons, we don't really have a good grasp of the grace of God. And he said something very poignant to me. He said, if anyone needs grace, it's me. And he had lived a riotous homosexual, proud lifestyle, and then he had later abandoned that and wanted to reconcile with God. He was a Mormon, but he found solace in the teaching of grace, that if anyone needed extra help, extra love, needed a pass, needed some forgiveness, he recognized that he qualified. And that was very beautiful. That was the first time I had seen grace applied in a Mormon context. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. Mormons don't really have a good handle on this. And I remember this brother who confessed, he said, I was wrong to rebel against God. I was wrong to be so proud in my sin against God and pit myself against God. And now here I am at the feet of God asking for forgiveness. And not only has he been forgiving and merciful, but he's been gracious. He says, I'm grateful for that. Now, as a Mormon, I don't know. I got to reconcile that. So now grace is a big issue. But it applies to me too. I'm not a homosexual. I don't struggle with same-sex attraction. I struggle with dirty thoughts. I'm a red-blooded male. I'm not pure. I'm sometimes mean, spiteful, jealous, angry, proud. I've got so many sins, I can't name them all. Like, could God forgive me of my sin? Of course he could. Of course I know he could. Does he do it graciously? Or do I have to earn it? Do I have to be worthy of it? And now this cognitive dissonance really starts to rip me, where what do I have to earn it? What is this grace about?
What the man with the t-shirt said about grace made Erik recall a book that his brother had shared with him years before.
I remember my brother sent out this book that changed his life to all of his siblings, and I got one of them. And it was about this woman, this Mormon woman in a context talking about addiction. As Mormons, we should have a better understanding of grace. And the church for a time adopted that kind of as their handbook for addiction recovery. So people dealing with drugs, people dealing with sex addiction, people dealing with whatever. This now kind of becomes the handbook for, there's grace. We can be forgiven from God. And then at some point it was shut down to where, no, that sends the wrong message, that you're not doing your part. And I remember they pulled that book as the official book. And it says, in essence, the same thing that this same-sex attracted brother was testifying about to me, that we as Mormons need to understand grace better. Like really understand it in its proper context. It's not a paycheck, it's a gift. It's a free gift. God gives it because he loves us. And now I have to reconcile that, and I don't know how. How do I make that work with my Mormon faith? This message that's not exactly consistent with Mormonism. So that becomes a problem.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Jesus is Enough. To watch the video version of this episode or to support this project, please visit tilm.org/radio. Next time on Jesus is Enough, as he begins to embrace his new normal, Erik meets someone who could change everything for him. Ready to begin a new chapter in his life, he takes the leap and turns the page. That's next time on Jesus is Enough. Jesus is Enough is presented by Truth in Love Ministry. Truth in Love Ministry, based in Nampa, Idaho, is a Christian ministry devoted to proclaiming Christ to Mormons and empowering Christians to witness. In addition to offering time-tested training, it provides ongoing support. This includes person-to-person mentoring as well as websites with pages of practical tips, strategies, and witnessing stories. In addition to Jesus is Enough, it also produces the Witnessing Christ podcast. To learn more and lend your support, please visit tilm.org. Jesus is Enough is produced and written by Mark Parsons with writing assistance from Molly Parsons. It is produced and edited by Brian Urbanek with editing assistance from Josh Cappers and Colin Neville. The show was adapted for this format by Megan Nicious. You can learn more about Jesus is Enough at jesusisenough.org.
It is done, it is finished, no more debt I owe, paid in full, all sufficient.
Until next week, remember, keep planting those gospel seeds, trusting in the power of God's Word.
Hi, this is Molly and Mark from the Jesus is Enough ministry team. That episode of South Park was kind of shocking. You know, that was quite a few years ago, and I don't think a lot of people are watching South Park anymore. But there's a lot of pop cultural references about Mormonism today. Should we be watching those and using those as we are witnessing?
I've tried to keep a pulse on what's happening with Mormon culture from a Hollywood perspective. So over the last few years, there have been a number of mini-series on some of the terrible things that have happened with Mormon social media influencers and their children. There was Under the Banner of Heaven. It was a book originally and now a series. There was a horror film this last year with Kevin Bacon called Heretic that came out, where it was actually about 2 Mormon missionaries that he brought into his home. And recently, it's The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. And these are all showing a version of Mormonism, but it's not the version of Mormonism that most Mormons are living. And so Mormons are watching it, and I think if they were to bring up these shows or movies and ask us if we've seen them, what would we think about them? As you do that, be very careful, be very gentle in not speaking in a way that you're going to regret, but maybe turn it around on them first and say, well, what do you think about it? And go from there. We need to be more curious than critical when it comes to this content.
Put yourself in their shoes. There's plenty of shows made about Christians that are just preposterous. So he really starts to dive into Mormon truth claims and is uncertain about archaeological evidence from the Book of Mormon. And that just leads me to think about, should I be spending time on the lack of evidence for the Book of Mormon?
If, as a Christian witness, we're going to spend time on the lack of evidence for the Book of Mormon, we also would need to then spend time for the evidence for the Bible. And if you as a Christian witness are interested in and willing to take the time to really be able to talk through the truth claims when it comes to, yes, these locations in the Bible actually existed then and still exist today, these types of stories that happened in the Bible, whether it's the story of the slavery of the Israelites in Egypt and their relationship to the true historical timeline, we need to be able to not just say, well, they're true. Well, let's give some evidence then.
An always better strategy to focus on the Bible rather than making the Book of Mormon fall apart. Lots of times that kind of happens on its own once there's a foundation for the Bible.
And there will come a time where a Mormon that has had their shelf break and has lost trust in the Book of Mormon will need to have their foundation of, I can trust the Bible, rebuilt. But often that comes later on. So
Erik goes through a pretty challenging divorce. And divorce and relationship problems they're challenging for everyone. But what is unique about a Mormon marriage in crisis?
So he's starting to see the earthly ramifications as well as the eternal ramifications, not only for himself, but for his wife and his children. And now the perfect celestial family tree that could lead to exaltation has been severely broken. And now he's got to figure out, what do I do now? Where does this lead?
Really painful, scary times. The bishop gave him advice to read more scripture, pray more, do more righteous works, do more temple work. Why is the concept of more supposed to be helpful in a marriage crisis?
This is the heart and core of all works-based religious systems, is if things aren't going well for you, it must be something you're doing wrong. And so you just need to find the proper checklist to follow and start checking boxes, and then eventually things will line back up. Now, as a Christian pastor, if someone was going through divorce, would I tell them to read the Bible and lean into it? Yes. Not as a checklist item, though, but to find strength and comfort and confidence from it.
And he received such a unique view of grace from the men that did help him get through his divorce. Anger camp. I like how he called it anger camp. His friend applied grace to brokenness. Why was that so unique?
So what Erik saw in this man was a man whose life was really a mess, but was just basking in the goodness of God's grace. And Erik was like, wow, this guy needs grace. He got grace. He understands grace. And it built on what God had been teaching Erik his entire life, starting with those lessons with his mother, with the Bible and the counterfeit bills for his class, that grace comes to us in our brokenness, in our sinful condition. And Erik started to see that in this friend and in himself.
Such a beautiful view of the gift that God wants to give us. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Witnessing Christ. Witnessing Christ is a truth and love ministry podcast. For more resources, visit tilm.org. If this podcast and other truth and love ministry resources have been a blessing to you, consider supporting the mission to proclaim Christ to Mormons and empower Christians to witness by visiting tilm.org/give.